New format alert!
Welcome to Climate Quickies, bite-sized nuggets of climate goodies from our TED experts in under 5 minutes. This week, we're hearing from Melinda Janki, lawyer extraordinaire and the woman behind Guyana's fight against fossil fuel giant ExxonMobil.
We originally heard from Melinda on how one of South America's most beautiful countries is fighting back against big oil.
Today, we wanted to resurface this clip where she questions why developing countries are being airbrushed out of the global climate movement, despite being carbon sinks and therefore climate leaders.
She points out that what's happening in Guyana can be a disaster for the whole world. But because it's not here in London or New York or LA or anywhere else in the global north, you know, all of the rich places, we don't see it, we don't know about it, and we don't care about it. And that is not okay.
Now over to Melinda to tell us more about how the people who've contributed the most to climate change are not really the ones bearing the brunt of it.
Enjoy and stay curious.
You know, we've done a few episodes now on looking at the intersectionality of climate change, what it has to do with race. And we've talked about other countries, but we've looked very much at it within like a Western context. And for me, what really resonates here is we're looking at, you know, Black and brown people in another part of the world, that these communities, often who have the least to do with creating the problem, are now the ones who are at the forefront of experiencing like the harm, whether it's air pollution or, as you said, flooding and loss of livelihood. So for me, it's just been this really important connection between understanding, I guess this is what global solidarity is, right?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, because in the so-called rich countries, the ones that haven't got much biodiversity left but have got massive material assets, the disparity between rich and poor means that generally, not everywhere, but generally you can say that people of color are the ones that bear the brunt of environmental damage. And particularly now, the impacts of fossil fuels, including the toxic air, as well as global warming and rising sea level and so on. So within the rich countries, there is this divide already, and then there is a global divide between the countries that are materially rich and have built their economies on fossil fuels, and the countries that have not built their economies on fossil fuels and who are still fairly rich in biodiversity and are now bearing the brunt of the impact of those fossil fuel economies. It's not a story that's told very often. When you look at the international media, the portrayal of countries that are rich in biodiversity, former colonies, is these poor countries, they're all victims, they're weak, they're incompetent, they're corrupt. And when you fight back, they don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear, for example, about former colonial peoples standing up against the oil industry, which is really a form of neo-imperial exploitation. They don't want to hear that. The fight against oil in Guyana barely breaks it through the surface. It doesn't fit with what people want to hear, or at least it doesn't fit with the interests of international media in general. I mean, there are exceptions, and there's some fantastic, brilliant journalists out here who are telling the story. But it does generally, that's not the message that goes out, that we are fighting back against oil and standing up to one of the biggest companies in the world and its two partners and a government and the World Bank and the IDB and the IMF and all the vested interests that go with that.
Thanks for listening to this quickie.
This episode was created by our usual Superstar podcast team and supported by TEDx London's headline partner, City. Until next time,
Stay curious.